Imagine that we are about to enter one of the most critical moments in human history, and surprisingly, you may not be prepared for it. Most people live their lives without even imagining that behind the scenes of world politics, powerful forces are coming together to present to the world the leader who will dominate the earth, the Antichrist. That's right. A figure that has been prophesied for millennia is about to emerge, and 10 men will play a central role in that plan. These seemingly harmless and charismatic leaders will be at the head of a global alliance that will forever change the course of history. And what does this mean for you? Well, more than you can imagine. While many continue to be preoccupied with everyday problems, the prophecies are being fulfilled before our eyes. Scripture speaks of a world government controlled by these 10 kings that will facilitate the rise of the Antichrist. But here's the detail that no one tells you. It's not something distant or just theoretical. Everything you thought about politics, economics, and religion will be challenged by this event that is getting closer and closer to happening. The global scenario is already prepared, and most people don't even realize it. Now you must be wondering, how is it possible for something like this to happen without the world reacting? And that's where the big secret lies. These 10 men, influential leaders, will be at the center of a false promise of peace and prosperity. They will offer solutions that will seem perfect for a world in crisis, but in fact, they will be paving the way for the complete domination of the Antichrist. Are you prepared to recognize these signs? Or will you, like many, be attracted by the false sense of security they will present? This introduction may seem controversial, and that's exactly what it needs to be. We are talking about an event that will not only change the future, but that is already in motion. The prophecies of Daniel and Revelation line up in a striking way with the events we see in the world today. Now more than ever, it's time to open your eyes to what's about to happen. Keep watching and find out how the 10 men who will introduce the Antichrist to the world are already in action, and how you can prepare for what's to come. The prophecy about the rise of the Antichrist is one of the most intriguing and intense themes of the end times. According to the books of Daniel and Revelation, this world leader will not emerge immediately, but will be preceded by a series of events that will shape the global scenario for his arrival. 10 kings, powerful political figures, will play an essential role in this process. They will be like chess pieces, strategically placed to facilitate the emergence of the Antichrist. It is interesting to note how these kings will not have fixed kingdoms, but will act with momentary power in a temporary alliance. What many do not know is that the prophecy suggests a world government, something that seems far away, but the signs are already here. These kings will stand out for their influence and ability to unite nations, creating an environment conducive to the Antichrist taking control. They will be leaders who, in the midst of chaos, will offer seductive solutions, promising peace and stability. But as we know, not all that glitters is gold. Interestingly, history shows that great leaders, such as Napoleon or Hitler, rose in times of global crisis, which makes us reflect on how humanity's next steps can follow a similar pattern. The difference is that this time dominance will be absolute, with the help of technology and globalization. Ever wondered how world governments are increasingly interconnected? The rise of the Antichrist will also be marked by a drastic shift in power dynamics. 3 of these 10 kings will be overthrown directly by the Antichrist, consolidating his control over the remaining 7. This is not just a biblical detail, but an indication of how power can be brutally concentrated in the hands of a few. The prophecy is clear. He will not be an ordinary leader, but someone with charisma, intelligence, and an almost supernatural ability to manipulate the masses. Have you ever thought about how certain current leaders seem to mesmerize crowds with their words? The difference is that the Antichrist will do this on a global scale, with a power that few will be able to question. The scariest thing is that this figure will not initially be seen as evil. On the contrary, many will see him as the savior of an age of tribulation. The promise of a unified world government with the supposed guarantee of peace will be too tempting to ignore. And so, the figure of the Antichrist will consolidate itself as the center of power, politics, and religion. But are we ready to notice when it appears? The Bible gives us signs, but they are not obvious. Those who are attentive to the prophecy will be able to perceive its arrival, while others will be deceived by the false peace it will offer. And with that rise, something even more disturbing is about to happen. The book of Daniel is one of the greatest sources of revelation about the future of mankind. In chapters 7 and 9, we find visions describing the rise of great empires and the rise of the Antichrist. Daniel 7:7. 8 presents a vision where he sees a beast with 10 horns, symbolizing 10 kings. In the midst of these horns appears a little horn, which represents the Antichrist, who will overthrow 3 of the kings. This little horn speaks arrogantly and represents the beginning of the total domination of the Antichrist. The wealth of detail that Daniel gives us is fascinating and frightening, especially when we see that the events he describes are connected to the present day. We are closer to this scenario than many imagine. Daniel's prophecy continues to amaze, especially as it describes the rise of the last world empire. Daniel 2:43 mentions a statue composed of 4 great empires, the last being the strongest and the most terrible, symbolized by iron and clay. This last empire is seen as the precursor to the rule of the Antichrist, as it emerges in the period of greatest global instability. It is a divided empire, strong and fragile at the same time, which makes us reflect on the condition of current governments. Powerful governments, but with increasingly fragmented societies. This also points to globalization and the interconnectedness of modern realms. In chapter 7, verses 23 and 24, Daniel receives more details about what is to come. He says that the 4th kingdom will devour the whole earth, which many scholars interpret as the establishment of a world government. That's where the Antichrist comes into the picture, overthrowing 3 kings and establishing his absolute dominion over the other 7. The description is clear. This government will be ruthless and will control every aspect of people's lives. The power that the Antichrist will wield will be brutal, both in a political and religious sense. It will be an age of tribulation for those who do not submit to it, and here we see how the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. This world government prophesied by Daniel will line up perfectly with what we see described in Revelation. Daniel 9:27 talks about a covenant that the Antichrist will make for 1 week, which many interpret as 7 years. During this time he will break the covenant in half, bringing about the abomination of desolation, an event that marks the culmination of his rebellion against God. Those who are attentive to Daniel's prophecies will be able to see the signs being fulfilled. But how many are actually watching? The world will move toward the worship of the Antichrist, while the faithful remnant will resist the mark of the beast and global oppression. The prophecy surrounding the 10 kings plays a crucial role in the rise of the Antichrist. In Revelation 17:12-13, we read that these kings have not received kingdoms yet, but will have authority along with the beast for 1 hour. This expression indicates a short period of power, but with a massive influence on the global stage. These kings represent political leaders of powerful nations who will unexpectedly cede their power to the Antichrist. The union of these 10 kings marks the beginning of a new world order where power will be concentrated in a few, but with a profound impact on the entire world. They will be the facilitators for world government. It is interesting to realize that even with political power, these kings will act as puppets of the Antichrist. In Revelation 17:17, it is written that God has placed in their hearts the desire to fulfill his purpose, giving his kingdoms to the beast until God's words are fulfilled. This temporary union will be seen as a global political solution, but it will actually be the path that will lead the world into total submission to the Antichrist. The Antichrist will use this power structure to consolidate his dominion over all nations, bringing unprecedented control. Have you ever stopped to think about how current movements of political and economic unification may be preparing the ground for this event? The fact that 3 of these kings will be directly eliminated by the Antichrist, as mentioned in Daniel 7:24, is a striking detail. This shows that despite forming an alliance, the Antichrist will not share power equally. He will consolidate his rule in a ruthless manner, eliminating any opposition among the allied kings themselves. This act of betrayal within the global alliance is a foretaste of how the Antichrist's rule will be marked by cruelty and absolute control. What we can learn here is that the pursuit of power at any cost has devastating consequences, both spiritually and socially. These 7 remaining kings, now totally submissive to the Antichrist, will become pillars of his world government. They will help implement their rule, including the imposition of the mark of the beast, one of the central elements of this age of tribulation. With the support of the kings, the Antichrist will have complete control over the global economy and politics, forcing everyone to submit to his rule. It is a grim reality, but one that is increasingly clear in Scripture. The connection between the 10 kings and the world government is one of the central points in understanding how the Antichrist will establish himself as the supreme leader in the end times. The image of the beast of Revelation is one of the most powerful and symbolic in all of biblical prophecy. In Revelation 13:1, 2, we see the description of this creature, a beast that came up out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 diadems. This beast is a direct representation of the Antichrist, the supreme leader who will dominate the world. Its 7 heads symbolize kingdoms or leaders that once existed, while the 10 horns correspond to the 10 kings who will support its rule. This image is not only frightening, but it carries a deep meaning about the absolute power that the Antichrist will have in the last days. The beast receives its power directly from the dragon, which symbolizes Satan. In Revelation 13:2, it is written that the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. This detail is important, as it shows that the Antichrist will not only be a political leader, but also a spiritual figure who will be worshipped as a god. This reminds us of how leaders in the past, such as the Roman emperors, also considered themselves gods and demanded worship. The Antichrist, however, will take this to an unprecedented level, demanding absolute loyalty from all the inhabitants of the earth. Those who do not submit to it will be persecuted and eliminated. An intriguing aspect of this prophecy is that the Antichrist will not rule alone. Revelation 13:5 mentions that he will have authority for 42 months, the equivalent of 3.5 years, during which he will exercise total power over the world. This period coincides with the second half of the tribulation, where chaos will be established globally. The scriptures say that he will do great signs and wonders to deceive mankind, and many will be led to believe that he is the solution to all problems. The promises of a unified world government of peace and prosperity will appeal to the masses, but behind this will be the dark agenda of total domination. Revelation 13:7 also reveals that the Antichrist will have power over every tribe and tongue and nation. This means that its control will be universal, something never seen before in the history of humanity. It will not be just a matter of political power, but of economic and spiritual control. This government will have a complete reach over every aspect of human life, and the worship of Antichrist will be imposed in a brutal manner. All of this is part of the grand plan that will culminate in the imposition of the mark of the beast, a theme that we will address next, but which is already beginning to take shape with the total government of the beast. The false prophet is a central figure in the events of the last days, described in Revelation 13:11-15 as the one who will work alongside the Antichrist. He is portrayed as a beast that came up out of the earth, with 2 horns like a lamb, but who speaks like a dragon. This reveals his deceitful nature. He appears to be meek and harmless, like a lamb, but his words are deceitful and destructive. The false prophet will have the mission of convincing the world to worship the Antichrist, using signs and wonders that will impress the masses. He will be, in a way, the spiritual leader of this global regime of deception. One of the most impressive signs that the false prophet will perform will be described in Revelation 13:13, where he brings down fire from heaven to the earth in the sight of men. This miraculous act will convince many that he is a divine envoy, leading people to blindly believe his words. But in fact, he will be turning mankind away from true faith in God, establishing a false religion that will glorify the Antichrist. This religious system, often referred to as the religion of Babylon, will be one of the pillars of world government in the last days. He will promote a corrupt spirituality, which will only serve the interests of the Antichrist. This false religion will be a powerful tool in the hands of the Antichrist and the false prophet. Revelation 13:15 says that the false prophet will give breath to the image of the beast, and that all those who do not worship that image will be put to death. This is not just symbolic worship, but a requirement of total loyalty to the Antichrist. The false prophet will create a system where people's life and death will depend on their submission to this worship. Imagine a world where religion, politics, and economics are completely intertwined under an authoritarian regime. This will be the scenario in the last days, where the worship of the Antichrist will be mandatory. The false prophet will also be responsible for implementing the famous mark of the beast mentioned in Revelation 13:16, 17, which will be required for people to buy or sell. This brand will not only be a symbol of loyalty, but a tool of economic and social control. Those who refuse to accept it will be excluded from the system, living on the margins of society. This total control, promoted by the false prophet, will be one of the last steps before the final judgment. What many do not realize is that this system is already beginning to manifest in subtle forms in today's world, paving the way for what is to come. The mark of the beast is one of the most discussed and feared aspects of Bible prophecy. In Revelation 13:16, 17, we read that, "On all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, this mark will be imposed. It will be placed on the right hand or on the forehead, and no one will be able to buy or sell without having it." This control over the global economy will be total, forcing people to choose between loyalty to the Antichrist or their faith in God. The mark symbolizes a complete submission to the world government of the Antichrist and the false prophet, making it clear that there will be no room for neutrality. This decision will define the fate of many in the last days. The control exercised by the mark of the beast will not be limited to the economic field. It will also be a symbol of worship and spiritual loyalty. Revelation 14:9-10 warns that if anyone worships the beast and his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he will drink of the wine of the wrath of God. This means that accepting the mark will not be just a practical matter, but a spiritual alliance with the Antichrist, a direct rebellion against God. Those who accept the mark will be sealing their fate of eternal damnation. This will be a turning point where people's true character and faith will be tested. There are many discussions about what exactly the mark of the beast will be. Some theories speak of advanced technologies, such as implants or digital devices, that could be used to control economic transactions and identify citizens. While Scripture does not provide exact details about the shape of the mark, the central idea is that it will be a comprehensive control system. It is interesting to note how the world is becoming increasingly dependent on digital technologies, which makes us think about how this global control can manifest itself. Are we already living the first steps of a system that will align with this prophecy? Refusing the mark of the beast will not be easy. Those who refuse will face intense persecution, economic exclusion, and even death. Revelation 20:4 speaks of those who did not worship the beast or his image, nor received his mark in their foreheads or in their hands, and who will be resurrected and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. This promise of eternal victory is a hope for those who remain faithful, but the road there will be fraught with tribulation. The mark will be the last great test of loyalty to humanity, separating those who will choose divine truth from those who will follow the Antichrist. The concept of a one-world government is central to end-time prophecies, being one of the pillars for the rule of the Antichrist. Revelation 13:7 reveals to us that power was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation, indicating that his control will be universal. This government will not be like any other the world has ever seen. He will combine political, economic, and religious power, and every aspect of life will be under the rule of the Antichrist. What we see today are nations that are increasingly interconnected, with global economic and political systems, which may be a harbinger of this future government. The prophecy warns us of how quickly the world can change. This world government will be presented as the solution to global instability. Wars, economic crises, and natural disasters will set the stage for the Antichrist to emerge as the leader who will bring about a false peace. In Daniel 8:25, we read that by his understanding, he will also make deceit prosper in his hand, and in his heart he will magnify himself, and in prosperity he will destroy many. The promise of security and prosperity will be the perfect bait for nations to surrender their power to him. However, this peace will be illusory, and the price to be paid will be freedom and true faith. We already see how leaders today talk about global unification as the answer to humanity's challenges. One of the most striking features of this government will be total control over the economy. As mentioned in Revelation 13:16-17, the mark of the beast will be essential to participate in society, allowing only those who have it to buy or sell. This will be an unprecedented control, where the Antichrist will have the ability to monitor and control all economic transactions. Current technology, such as digital currencies and biometric identification systems, already gives us a preview of how this can be implemented. It is not far-fetched to imagine that in the future, every aspect of economic life may be subject to this kind of total control. Such a world government will also have a religious character. Revelation 13:8 says that all who dwell on the earth will worship him, referring to the Antichrist. Through the spiritual leadership of the false prophet, a global religion will be established, where the Antichrist will be worshipped as a god. This is part of the great rebellion against God, a final attempt by Satan to lead mankind astray. This religious system will be a tool to enforce the control of the world government, demanding absolute worship. All who refuse to worship the Antichrist will face severe persecution, but this will also be the opportunity for the faithful to demonstrate their loyalty to God. The fall of Babylon is one of the most dramatic events described in biblical prophecies. In Revelation 18:2, the angel declares, "Babylon the Great is fallen." This ancient city, a symbol of rebellion against God, is often associated with the corrupt world system of the last days. Babylon, in the prophetic context, represents more than a physical location. It symbolizes the political, economic, and religious system that the Antichrist and the false prophet will use to deceive the world. The fall of Babylon is therefore the collapse of that system. It is divine justice being manifested in a powerful and relentless way. This event will be a pivotal point in the Great Tribulation. Revelation 18:10 describes how the kings of the earth, who lived in luxury with Babylon, will mourn their destruction. This reveals how much the influence of this city will be spread around the world. Entire nations will depend on its system of trade and control, and its fall will be devastating to the global economy. Today, we already see how interconnected financial and political systems are. If a centralized system like this goes down, the whole world will feel the impact. The destruction of Babylon will be a sample of how vulnerable is the system that many consider indestructible. Babylon's judgment is also a wake-up call. Revelation 18:4 contains a clear warning. "Come out of her, my people, that you may not be partakers of her sins." This call is a warning to those who recognize the truth not to get involved with the corrupt system of the world. Those who put their trust in the riches, power, and comfort offered by this system will be surprised by its sudden fall. We are already seeing signs of how corruption and injustice are infiltrated in the world's governments and economies, which leads us to reflect, who do we really trust? The fall of Babylon is the beginning of the end of the reign of the Antichrist. It is the moment when the world system, built on deception and rebellion, begins to crumble. For those who have followed the Antichrist, it will be a time of despair and mourning. For the faithful, it will be a sign that Christ's return is near. The collapse of this system opens the way for divine justice to fully manifest on earth. But what comes next will be even more impactful as we approach the final events prophesied in the book of Revelation. The return of Christ is the culminating event of all prophecies. In Revelation 19:11-16, we have an impressive vision of Jesus returning to earth as a victorious warrior riding on a white horse. He brings with him the heavenly army and comes to defeat the Antichrist and his followers. Christ's return will not only be a moment of glory for the faithful, but also the definitive end of the reign of the Antichrist. What many do not realize is that, while the world will be in chaos because of the tribulation, this will be the time when Christ will come to restore righteousness. This return will be marked by an epic battle known as the Battle of Armageddon. Revelation 16:16 talks about the nations being gathered at the place called Armageddon to fight against Christ. The Antichrist and his armies will try to resist, but they will be completely defeated. The word of Christ will be the ultimate weapon, bringing judgment upon those who have rebelled against God. This battle represents the end point in the story of the Antichrist. He who was seen as invincible will fall before the power of the true King of Kings. Revelation 19:20 says that the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet. This will be the moment of total defeat of the power system that dominated the world during the tribulation. The Antichrist and the false prophet will be cast into the lake of fire, sealing the fate of those who led the final rebellion against God. For the faithful, it will be a moment of great victory, but for the world that followed the Antichrist, it will be the end of illusions. This event marks the beginning of a new era where Christ will reign with righteousness and truth. Christ's return is not only the end of evil, but the beginning of a complete restoration. He will establish a kingdom of peace and justice on earth, something that the Antichrist could never offer. Those who have remained steadfast in the faith during the tribulation will have the honor of reigning with Christ for 1,000 years, as described in Revelation 24. But before that, there are even more details about the ultimate destiny of humanity, which will unfold in the following events of the divine plan. After the return of Christ and the defeat of the Antichrist, the Bible speaks of a 1,000-year period in which Jesus will reign over the earth. This time, known as the millennium, is described in Revelation 20:4-6, where the faithful who resisted the Antichrist will live and reign with Christ during these 1,000 years. This reign will be marked by justice, peace, and prosperity, as never before seen in the history of humanity. It will be a time of restoration, where the world will finally experience the true peace that only Christ can offer. It will be a stark contrast to the chaos and oppression of the Antichrist's government. During the millennium, Satan will be bound, as described in Revelation 20:1-3, prevented from deceiving the nations. This will allow the world to live in harmony under Christ's righteous rule. Imagine a world where war, injustice, and corruption no longer exist. It will be a time of true renewal, where all things will be made new. However, despite this temporary peace, the millennium will also serve as a preparation for the final judgment, as evil will not yet be completely eradicated. There will be one last rebellion, which will be addressed next. The promise of millennial reign is a reminder that God always keeps his promises. Old Testament prophets such as Isaiah and Ezekiel spoke of this time of peace and prosperity, where nations will live in harmony. Isaiah 11:6-9 describes a scenario where the wolf will dwell with the lamb, and the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. This will be the reality during the millennium, where Christ will rule justly and the faithful will experience the promised blessings. But even in this time of peace, there will be those who in the end will choose to rebel. At the end of the millennium, Satan will be released for a brief period to test the nations, according to Revelation 20:7-8. This will reveal that even after 1,000 years of peace, there will still be those who will oppose God. This final rebellion will be quickly crushed, but it will serve as a reminder that the human heart, without divine transformation, will always seek to rebel. And it is at this point that the last chapter of human history will unfold, the final judgment. The great final judgment is the event that will end the history of humanity as we know it. In Revelation 20:11-15, a white throne is described, before which all the dead, great and small, will appear to be judged. This is the time when all who have lived since the beginning of time will have their lives evaluated before God. Those who are not inscribed in the book of life will be cast into the lake of fire, the ultimate destination of evil. This judgment will be the definitive conclusion of the rebellion that began with the fall of Satan. In this trial, there will be no more excuses, no more disguises. Revelation 20:12 tells us that the dead were judged according to their works. All will have to face the consequences of their choices, and God's justice will be fully revealed. The big lesson here is that regardless of our accomplishments or power on earth, what matters is our relationship with God. Those who rejected the Antichrist and remained faithful to Christ will be rewarded, while those who rebelled will face eternal damnation. This is also the time when death and hell will be destroyed. Revelation 20:14 says that death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. That is the end of evil's power over humanity. Sin, death, and all corruption will be completely eradicated, and creation will be renewed. For the faithful, this means the beginning of a new era where there will be no more pain, suffering, or death. This judgment marks the end of all old things and the beginning of a new heaven and a new earth. The great final judgment is undoubtedly the most solemn event in history, but at the same time, it is also the beginning of something extraordinary. After this judgment, God will establish a new creation where He will dwell with His people forever. Revelation 21:1 describes this new reality. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, because the first heaven and the first earth passed away. The history of mankind will end with righteousness and redemption, and God's people will live eternally in His presence. But before that, there is a lot to reveal about this new creation. Now that you know the role of these 10 men in the rise of the Antichrist, it is time to reflect. What will you do with this knowledge? Bible prophecies were not written to make us afraid, but to prepare us for what is to come. Are you ready to recognize the signs, resist the pressure to take the easy, shallow path that will be offered? Perhaps you never thought that the global landscape could change so quickly, but events are unfolding before us. And the choice between following the truth or submitting to the lie is closer than you think. So the big question is, will you be a passive spectator or someone who acts with wisdom and discernment? History shows us that many have been carried away by promises of peace and security without realizing the danger behind them. But now you have the chance to act differently. What can you do? Start by digging deeper into the scriptures, study Daniel and Revelation, understand the signs, and keep on the watch. It is not a question of if these events will happen, but of when. The question is, will you be prepared when that moment comes? And before you leave, here's one more challenge. How can you apply this knowledge in your daily life? It is not just about understanding the prophecies, but about being spiritually prepared to face the adversities that will come. Maybe that means reevaluating your priorities, strengthening your faith, or even sharing those truths with those who are still in the dark. The decision to prepare is in your hands, and the time to act is now. Life will not be the same when these events unfold, but your spiritual preparation can make all the difference. So if you want to keep learning and be ahead when the signs become clearer and clearer, subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any content that can transform your perspective on the times we're living in. Together, we can continue this journey of learning and preparation so that when the time comes, you will be ready to face everything with wisdom and discernment. Don't waste time, sign up and get ready for what's to come. Even after the millennial reign of Christ, the history of humanity still reserves one last chapter of confrontation. Revelation 27:8 describes that at the end of the millennium, Satan will be released from the prison where he has been for 1,000 years and go forth to deceive the nations. His release will be brief but intense. The fact that he will be able to assemble an immense army, like the sand of the sea, reveals that even after a period of peace and righteousness under Christ, there will still be those who will be seduced by rebellion. This is a proof that the human heart, without true transformation, can be deceived even in the most favorable circumstances. This last rebellion will be led by Satan, who will once again try to challenge God's power. The nations, deceitfully attracted by his lies, will unite to attack the camp of the saints and the beloved city, as described in Revelation 29. However, unlike previous battles, this confrontation will be short and decisive. The Bible says that fire came down from heaven and devoured them. God's power will be manifested immediately and overwhelmingly, eliminating any resistance. This event marks the ultimate end of Satan and all who followed him. Revelation 20:10 reveals to us Satan's final fate. And the devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are. This is the final judgment on Satan, where he will be tormented forever and ever, ending his history of rebellion that began from the very beginning of creation. The lake of fire is not only a punishment, but the ultimate manifestation of divine justice, where all evil is eradicated forever. This moment brings a definitive end to the power of evil over humanity and creation. Satan's latest rebellion is a reminder that even after 1,000 years of peace, the free will of humans will allow some to choose the wrong path. But the end of this rebellion also assures us that God is sovereign and that evil will not have the final word. The focus now turns to eternity with God, where there will be no more rebellion, suffering, or pain. After this event, creation will finally be ready to enter the eternal era of peace and full communion with the Creator. Before the definitive establishment of the New Jerusalem, there is a crucial event that occurs in the prophetic chronology, the judgment of the nations. This judgment is described by Jesus in Matthew 25:31-46, when he speaks of the time when the Son of Man will come in his glory. This judgment is not the same as the great white throne, but takes place after the return of Christ and before the millennium. In this event, all nations will be gathered before Christ, and he will separate people as a shepherd separates goats from sheep. This judgment will be made based on the actions performed by people during the tribulation. The key to the judgment of the nations lies in the way people treated the brothers of Christ, that is, those who belong to God and who were persecuted during the Great Tribulation. Jesus will say to those on his right, "The righteous, come, ye blessed of my Father, enter into the possession of the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Matthew 25:34. They will be rewarded for caring for the needy, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and visiting prisoners, representing their loyalty to God in caring for his own. On the other hand, those on the left who have neglected the needy and rejected the followers of Christ will be condemned. Jesus will say, "Depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels." Matthew 25:41. This judgment will be based not only on physical actions, but on the state of the hearts of these people who have chosen to reject the truth and support the Antichrist system. This event will clearly separate those who have shown mercy from those who have followed the path of selfishness and indifference. The judgment of the nations also highlights divine justice in a very practical way, not just judging intentions, but actual actions that demonstrate faith. Those who welcomed and protected the faithful during the time of persecution will be rewarded. This judgment marks the beginning of the final restoration, for the righteous will inherit Christ's kingdom and reign with him throughout the millennium. This is the last major event before creation is renewed and earth enters an era of unprecedented peace. Now that you know the role of these 10 men in the rise of the Antichrist, it is time to reflect. What will you do with this knowledge? Bible prophecies were not written to make us afraid, but to prepare us for what is to come. Are you ready to recognize the signs, resist the pressure to take the easy, shallow path that will be offered? Perhaps you never thought that the global landscape could change so quickly, but events are unfolding before us, and the choice between following the truth or submitting to the lie is closer than you think. So the big question is, will you be a passive spectator or someone who acts with wisdom and discernment? History shows us that many have been carried away by promises of peace and security without realizing the danger behind them. But now you have the chance to act differently. What can you do? Start by digging deeper into the scriptures. Study Daniel and Revelation, understand the signs, and keep on the watch. It is not a question of if these events will happen, but of when. The question is, will you be prepared when that moment comes? And before you leave, here's one more challenge. How can you apply this knowledge in your daily life? It is not just about understanding the prophecies, but about being spiritually prepared to face the adversities that will come. Maybe that means re-evaluating your priorities, strengthening your faith, or even sharing those truths with those who are still in the dark. The decision to prepare is in your hands, and the time to act is now. Life will not be the same when these events unfold, but your spiritual preparation can make all the difference. So if you want to keep learning and be ahead when the signs become clearer and clearer, subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any content that can transform your perspective on the times we're living in. Together, we can continue this journey of learning and preparation, so that when the time comes, you will be ready to face everything with wisdom and discernment. Don't waste time, sign up and get ready for what's to come.